from your angle on Friday, from all my research, is what the president currently believes. So you're spot on. You tie that into Skousen believing he was misled. I know you've learned more now over the weekend. That's why you wanted to come on, so we're honored to have you on. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, what is the latest information you have?
What I'm concerned about, and this is a warning to our generals, McMaster, Mathis, and others who think that they can do a regime change in Syria. Number one, that will not be possible. Not with the military, not with all the forces you have, and not with the quality of the soldiers that we have or the generals. Let me be very blunt. Of all the people I know, I have been probably the only one who's been interrogated by Bashar Assad for hours, at the same time worked against Hafiz Assad, and at the same time had a clear understanding of how strong the Bashar Assad family is and how entrenched they will be. So any notion of a regime change through force is both absurd and criminal. If it occurs, there will be no reason whatsoever, including chemical weapons or any other cause belli that will be espoused by either the intelligence community or the president. But the presence of a huge amount of Marines and special forces and thousands of regular soldiers means that we are prepositioning to go in for a war, maybe against ISIS. But remember, ISIS and Al-Qaeda was created by us, by the CIA, by our military intelligence. So to say that we're going to attack a terrorist group which we created means we're attacking ourselves. The same issues right here in Syria. The issue of Syria and Bashar Assad has no national security interest whatsoever to America. What Bashar Assad has done to his people remains to his people. The Russians have handled it. Hezbollah has been involved. Turkey has been involved. The Israelis have been involved. But let me tell you several things. Number one, we have not won a war, including World War II. Let me make it very clear to McMaster, who's talking about dereliction of duty. This will be an incredible dereliction of duty if we go into war, either in Iraq or we can go into Syria. Why? Because McMaster knows very well we are not capable of executing an effective strike. We have never won a war. Even World War II was primarily won in 1942 and 43 by the Russians at Stalingrad. I teach that at Fort McNair. I have told every general, we have lost Vietnam, we lost Korea, we lost Iraq, we lost Afghanistan, so on and so forth. McMaster will come forth and be tried for criminal activity, as will Mathis, because there is no reason to put our men and women in harm's way for oil pipelines or whatever nonsense that this military-industrial complex thinks that we need to do in order to get into the Middle East. We have no interest in the Middle East. If anything, the PSYOPs that was created with President Xi Jinping from China was an excellent PSYOPs. It means we're drawing to the Asia Peninsula, that's fine. We pre-position for North Korea, but it does not mean we go either into North Korea or China or Syria. There is no cause for war on either flank. My concern is that, again, we're going through the nonsense of the neocons. I think that David Knight had made a point yesterday. My point was simply that the PSYOPs that was done at Trump's hotel was very effective. But if this goes any step further, this is a warning to our generals, to our president, and to anyone involved. Once again, we will react quite vociferously and strongly. This is grounds for all types of legal action against the president and a voting that will create a desertion.
Okay, but let me stop you. Let me stop you, Dr. Pieczenik, because we go from Friday, you saying, I get the PSYOP. Right. You can't prove either way where the attack came from. The jets did come from there. There are chemicals at the base. From the president's perspective, because I've learned stuff over the weekend, it's dead on what you said. The president's like, we have an agreement going back 4 years with the Russians and Assad to start moving out once we defeat Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We can't say one way or the other. They didn't get the chemicals out of there. We have the intelligence. So we're going to blow them up in place, which I still have questions about what are they going to do if they actually hit them. Thank God the Russians pulled them out. And then Trump is saying, no, we're not doing no-flies. No, we're not taking Assad out. You saw Spicer come out today and say everything that was in our article this morning. He says it word for word 1 hour ago because it came from the president. And, of course, the media has heydays with this. I'm just going to stop right there. But I get thank you letters, you name it, from high level in the White House. We get phone calls. I check stuff. Then I call Stone, who gets calls quite a bit. Let's just say quite a bit. I mean, he don't want me to talk about it, but let's say a lot. And so it's all dead on information. And the president's like, no, but I'm not going to let anybody use these chemicals. I'm going to let people know if you do use them, I'm coming after you. And it's a message. And there's a deal in place. And then folks ask the president, well, why are the troops getting massed? And he goes, I can't talk about it. Now, this is word for word from the president. So our article is key. It's a White House source. Trump is pushing back against a neocon plan to invade Syria. And then you see McMaster and others on Fox News constantly, like he's the new press secretary, saying different things than what Trump and Spicer saying. And Spicer is taking notes directly from the president and putting them out on air. I mean, again, you listen to Spicer, it's word for word what's in our article that came out hours before. And so Roger Stone is calling. He's got some breaking news. There's a lot of breaking news taking place here as things unfold. So, again, taking that intel, what do you make of that? And then expanding on it. I guess you've got some really good sources, obviously, as well, because you're word for word saying what we're getting.
Let me tell you this. I understand what you're saying. I understand what Roger may be saying. What I'm telling you is that I know for a fact the people I know in the military are increasing their force structures to the degree that there is no strategy whatsoever. In effect, I wrote this to my people in the intelligence community and elsewhere. If you have no strategy and regime change is not a strategy, do not go into war. Increasing momentum.
Well, sure, if anything was ever a quagmire, it's Syria with all these different forces. So why is McMaster saying things different than the president and his press secretary?
Because it's an old technique. You have one person saying one thing, putting pressure on, then you have the president denying it. What you're doing is trying to confuse the public media, or otherwise said, you're trying to create a kind of disturbance for Assad, who's very smart. He's much smarter than our own people. He's an ophthalmologist. He's board certified. He's been in power for over 30 years. He understands what the reality is. But for the American public, which is being told two different things at the same time, you have to go back to the Bush administration, which said we're not going into war. You have to go back to the Obama administration, the Clinton administration. Everyone said
so. It's the very same neocon crap. So what does the president need to do?
The president needs to understand that if he goes to war, that's his problem, and we will have a major blowback domestically. The American people do not want to have a war. We do not want to send our kids into battle. Our military is not prepared for this kind of war. I've been in the Syrian desert during the summer. It's unbearable. It is huge. It is the homes and Hamas is filled with Sunnis. Our generals have no idea what they're doing. And in fact, if this is about pipeline wars or it's about the military-industrial complex, which it comes back again and again because we have no national security interest in Syria, Iraq, or Iran.
Okay, so how did you change since Friday where you thought good strategy? You said PSYOP Friday, a successful PSYOP. Now you're saying you're really concerned.
Well, because going from one PSYOP to China was the appropriate thing to do. But once I hear and I understand that there are more forces in Syria over the weekend, there was artillery placed in there. And in fact, they are creating in the White House what we call a dichotomy or two messages. That's totally different from what happened on Friday. Friday, nothing was said. Nothing was said in terms of the PSYOPs. It was elegant, it was effective, and we sent out a fleet, as you said, to the South China Sea. Whether we attack North Korea, I think that's not very bright, but at least we have a presence there. But once we have a statement by McMaster, and at the same time Trump denying it, so you have a purposeful confusion, then I am saying very clearly, do not go to war. We've been through this scenario repeatedly.
Sure, so what are the neocons thinking? Why do they want to go in war in Syria, much worse than Iraq, much worse than Libya? I mean, what are they thinking?
Have a pipeline. All of these neocons have never served our government. They've never been in war. They have belonged to the military-industrial
complex. So why is McMaster going along with it? He's the national security advisor now, not John McCain.
because McMaster is going to follow the orders of the president. In short, he may be committing the very sins he wrote about, dereliction of duty. There was dereliction of duty in Vietnam when he wrote about it, and Westmoreland and other generals followed through, knowing fully well we had never had a strategy, we never had an effective tactic, nor were our soldiers prepared. McMaster knows the same issues here. He knows we're not prepared, we're not effective, we have a one-to-one.
Sure, what about the Petraeus connection to McMaster?
Petraeus brought in McMaster and put him back as a lieutenant general because McMaster was basically isolated because of the book he wrote on dereliction of duty. But I'm not a fan of Petraeus, as I've said repeatedly. Petraeus went in, he self-promoted himself. He's never really been, other than South Carolina.
Well, sure, the reason we haven't won a war since World War II is we're in civil wars. No one ever wins a civil war. I mean, it's like sticking your hand in a beehive. There's no reason to do it.
Well, yeah, but let me be very clear. With all due respect, including my own father, we did not win World War II. What we did was to defeat the Japanese in order to release 100,000 troops, Russian troops, to go back into fight into Stalingrad and on the Western Front. By the time we went into Europe and Germany, the Soviets were on the Elbe River. So that has to be made very clear. George Marshall said it.
Well, sure. I mean, when it comes to casualties, the Russians lost 20 million people.
In World War II.
Yeah, we didn't even lose a million. Hold on. We'll be right back. Pieczenik of Pieczenik.com. Just briefly on China. How do you think the meeting went? What's the info you've got on that? The big task force group going up there by northern China and the South China Sea, by Japan, by the Korean Peninsula. Where do you expect all that to go? You got Lindsey Graham saying everybody about it better watch Trump. You know, he's a crazy guy, as if that's some positive thing. Plus, I don't think it's true. It just shows how crazy the neocons are wanting to, quote, scare the world.
Well, that's a good question. Actually, your assistant, Nico, just gave me an interesting point. First of all, the meeting went very well. What Trump did and McMaster's did was a brilliant PSYOPs operation focusing to Syria and then shifting really to the South China Sea. The real problem now, and this is where the regime change comes in, and this is where America has to watch itself. What's happened now, and Nico informed me that 150,000 Chinese soldiers went on the North Korean-China border. To me, that's very credible, and I'll tell you why. For over 30 years, I was held back on any regime change in North Korea because for me, it wasn't very hard to bring down North Korea. There are many simple ways to do it without going to war. However, one of the things that I had been warned about repeatedly was that China could not tolerate and would not tolerate the ingress of millions of North Koreans into China. That would eventually destabilize China. So what we have going on right now is the potential destabilization of North Korea and China knows that because President Xi Jinping was humiliated, and correctly so. And he has no idea of what Trump can or cannot do, but he does understand that Trump has the willpower to use force. At the same time, we're looking at Syria, where we're building up troops. One could be the distraction from the other, or at the same time, we would have two wars going on at the same time. That's up to our president, and that's up to our generals. I warn them about wars. Taking down regimes does not mean you have to have a war. In the case of China, this has already been quite significant for Trump to have said to Xi Jinping, look, I just launched 59 missiles. I want to make sure you understand that. Xi Jinping understands that, but at the same time, the Chinese have a hold over Jared Kushner and his buildings in 666 Fifth Avenue.
Let's talk about that when we come right back. Let's talk about ways foreign powers can influence the president. And we're not talking about Russia. From my info, it's the Chinese that are